Hundreds of years ago, across eastern part of Virginia, going south, longleaf pine dominated the ecosystem. Longleaf pine dominated because it knew how to deal with fire. Fire was a major part of the ecosystem. There wasn't houses, and Smokey Bear wasn't out shaking his finger at people telling him to stop wildfires. When wildfires existed, longleaf pine thrived. Longleaf pine is a fire-tolerant species. It's one of the native pine species in Virginia. You do not find it much in central Virginia. It's more of an eastern species. How do you can tell it's longleaf pine? Well, by these incredibly short needles. 8 to 12 inches long, and of course I'm being a little silly. These are the longest pine needles that we have in Virginia. They probably double the size of your average loblolly pine that you see a lot of. What makes this species special? Lots of things, and I could spend 45 minutes talking about longleaf pine, but I won't today. But what makes it fire adapted? Why does fire not burn it up, especially when it's really young? It has what we call a grass stage. So when this tree is really young, this is what it looks like. It'll look like this for 2 or 3 years. All these needles are protecting. What are they protecting? They're protecting the bud. So how do they protect that bud? That bud's where all the growth is. These needles will burn. And when they burn, they let out steam. That steam helps cool that bud down. So you have a hot fire, the needles might burn away, but that bud is protected. The needles will grow back, and it'll grow. And then once it gets got a good root system established, that tree will grow and grow. But it's got to spend the first few years trying to put that good root system on. And it uses the fire to kill off all the other species that are around it. It doesn't want competition. It wants to hang out there by himself and grow really big. So it likes that fire that'll kill everything off. So how does it get protected when it's older? A fire is still going to hurt it. If you come and look at this bark, longleaf pine has a very thick bark. The growing part of the tree is in the cambium, and that's right underneath the bark. So if you have a hot fire and a very thin bark, your cambium dies. Tree dies. Very thick bark, protect that cambium. One other really cool species thing about longleaf pine that made it a really neat species is its pitch, or its tar. It produces a lot of sap, and that sap is really good for boat building. It's really good for fixing things, and it was used a lot. So how did people get tar out of these trees 100, 200 years ago? Well, what they did, chop the trees down and put them in a pile. They put them in a great big pile, put dirt on the pile. Okay, it's not magic, I'm gonna get there. So, bunch of longleaf cut up in a big pile, lots of dirt on top. They dug a big trench around it, and they set fire to those trees. The dirt helped keep oxygen out. Oxygens need to burn, so it's a very slow burn. And while it burned, it released all that sap, or that pitch, and it went into the pit that was around it. You can still see these pits, especially in the eastern part of the state, eastern North Carolina. They have these tar pits where big longleaves were burned to collect the tar, and the pitch, it was used quite a bit in shipbuilding. So how do you tell the difference between a lot of your pine trees? One way is by the number of needles on each fascicle. So this whole piece right here is called a fascicle. Each fascicle has 3 needles. That is indicative of a longleaf pine, and they're really long. Not all species have just 3, but longleaf has just 3 needles on each fascicle.